Hello and welcome to Intermediate WordPress Gutenberg for Site Administrators. My name is Brian DeConnick, and my colleague Jen McFarland is also listening in. She'll jump in if we need anything from her or if there are any questions in the Q&A document. Just a quick introduction. Jen and I work as part of the OIT Design and Web Services team. So OIT, the Central IT Unit at NC State. We're here to help out with anything and everything web. It's 2 o'clock. The slides are available at that link if you'd like to follow along. Excuse me. And I guess just as a bit of warning, I'm feeling pretty well, but I'm getting over a cold that I had earlier in the week. So if I sound a little stuffy or if I have to mute myself and make some terrible noises in the privacy of my own room here, I hope you'll all bear with me as I do that. So let's go ahead and get started. On today's agenda, we're going to talk about Gutenberg. You may have heard something about it on campus or just elsewhere on the web. We're going to dig into what Gutenberg is, how the new editor in WordPress works, how it's different from what you're used to. We're going to talk a little bit about how your users might react and what we found in doing our own user testing here at NC State. We're going to look at different upgrade scenarios, what it looks like to turn on Gutenberg or upgrade to Gutenberg on your website, and then talk about what your options are for that timetable, and very briefly talk about extending Gutenberg and really getting more out of it, and really getting excited about this new thing coming to WordPress. This is a YouTube live event, which means we can do Q&A. There's a document linked in the description beneath the video, but Q&A is not exactly live. There's a little bit of a lag. There's a lag between when I say things and it gets broadcast. There's a lag between when you type something into the Google Doc and we see it, and then I can respond to it. So if you've got a question, I just ask that you're patient, and we'll try to answer them as we go, and also there will be time at the very end to answer questions as well. I'll also just say sometimes YouTube Live has little hiccups. One time everything kind of died on us and we had to restart the broadcast. I don't think that's going to happen today, but again, just be patient with us just in case something goes wrong. So with all of that said, we're going to learn a little bit about Gutenberg, especially from the perspective of somebody who is the administrator of a WordPress website. So let's all take a deep breath and get to it. So let's start with what's the big deal, the what, why, and when of Gutenberg. If you have been using WordPress, which I assume everybody who's listening today has been, you're probably familiar with something that looks like this. This is the what's being called now the classic WordPress visual editor. This has been the WordPress editor, the way we create and edit and manage our content. This has been the editor for the last 12 years. And it works well, but 12 years is a long time on the internet. Really what it comes down to is it's a great tool for WordPress, except for those times when it's not. It's really easy to build a simple web page that has text and images and things like that. It's dependable and reliable, and it gives you a really good WYSIWYG experience. What you see is what you get. Except also the classic editor, it's hard to build complex pages. It's kind of outdated and clunky. And what you see is not necessarily what you get, depending on several different factors. I was really proud of myself for the WYSIWYG stuff. I think I was more proud of myself than I should have been. I assume everybody's laughing at it. This is the other problem with YouTube Live, is I have no idea if my jokes are funny. So what do I mean by it is what you see is what you get, but it's also not what you see is what you get. So WordPress is great for simple pages. Rather not WordPress, but the classic editor is great for simple pages. So here on the left, I've created an about page. It has an image, it has text, it has a heading, it has a bulleted list with bold and links. It has all the things that you'd want on an about page like this. And when I publish it, it gets published and it looks basically like what I put into the editor. There's nothing really out of place. And so that's great. That's a good, what you see is what you get experience. But that's also a really simple web page. And if I want to do something a little more complex or a little more modern, like some of the things we're seeing on campus, or what we see on the NC State homepage, or just what we see in general out on the web, it's not exactly clear. So here on the right-hand side, we have a mock-up of a page. It's got a banner across the top with a gray box and an icon. It's got this like 2-column thing going on down at the bottom. It's got another icon, and then that whole thing is a clickable link that when you hover over it, the little arrow there scoots to the right, and you see that those little scooty arrows all the time on NC State websites, but there's not really a button to do that in the visual editor. It's not really clear how to do any of the stuff in this page in the visual editor that we've been using for the last 12 years. And so this is one of those points where 12 years is a long time. The web has moved on. There are expectations to be able to do more complex and interesting things. And now WordPress is trying to find a way to do it. It's not just the end user experience either. It's also the experience of creating content that's being improved. So it's not just what our users see, but also what we see as we're creating it. Over the last 12 years, there have been all these different ways people have come up with to squeeze more out of the existing classic visual editor. So here we have this sort of collage of different things people have done. So at the top left, there are these short codes. You may have used short codes on your websites with the square brackets. Right in the middle, there's an extension for short codes called Shortcake that our office has used a lot of, which gives you a way of inserting those short codes using a nice user interface. Over to the right-hand side, we have an example of a theme that's been built heavily relying on advanced custom fields, which is another plugin that's out there that gives you these sorts of modules that you put things into special fields and they populate on the front end. And then down in the bottom left-hand corner is an example of a page building plugin. This is a free, simple page building plugin that you add these sort of boxes and you click on the boxes and it gives you options for what goes in the boxes. And all of these work. All of these give you a lot of new options and flexibility in the WordPress editor, but all of a sudden, it's not what you see is what you get. And all of a sudden, there are all these special rules you have to learn, whether it's the names of the attributes in a short code, or whether it's this just new interface that you need to make sense out of. So they're all kind of hacky and unintuitive. And again, 12 years is a long time, and the rest of the web has been moving on into a new direction. So here we have 3 examples of popular web publishing platforms, Medium, Wix, and Squarespace. And each of them are bringing something slightly different to the web publishing world. Medium is a very clean and pretty white space, simple user interface. Wix has these contextual menus that pop up, so the bold italic toolbar right there only appears if you're selecting text that you want to be changing, and if you don't have text that's selected, then that menu disappears. And then Squarespace, you have these content blocks, this menu that opens up that lets you choose what you want to drop into a page. And this is the sort of user interface that the web in general is moving toward. And this is the sort of user interface that more and more people outside of using WordPress at NC State are starting to see for personal websites they might be building or things like that. So, WordPress has this challenge. And NC State in particular, we will continue to use WordPress. We're never going to switch to use something like Wix or Squarespace, just because WordPress is a lot more flexible and can be used at the scale that we do web at NC State a lot more easily than if we tried one of these other services. But these newcomers, these new services, they're a lot of fun to use. They give content creators a lot of control. They're a really modern and clean user interface, and there's a lot that can be learned from them. And it's not just me saying that, it's also other people in the WordPress world who are saying that. And in particular, it's Matt Mullenweg, who is one of the co-founders of the whole WordPress project, and the lead developer and sort of the guiding spirit of the WordPress world. And at the beginning of last year, January 2017, he announced what the new focus areas were going to be for the continuing development of the WordPress project. And in particular, he highlighted creating a new page and post building experience that makes writing rich posts effortless and has blocks to make it easy to do what we do with all those other things that I was just talking about, all those sorts of ways of squeezing more and more out of the classic editor. So that brings us to where we are now, this new thing called Gutenberg. So Gutenberg is the new editor, and it will be the default editor that everybody uses starting in WordPress version 5.0. When will WordPress 5.0 be released? That's been the big question everybody's been asking in the WordPress world. We've been keeping an eye on developments as closely as we can in our team. At one point, we were thinking it might be in April, but thankfully that didn't happen because we were not ready for it to happen in April. Now it's looking like it could happen as soon as October. But WordPress 5.0, if it doesn't come by October, it'll certainly come within a couple of months after that. There's a big push in the community right now to finish Gutenberg, really clean it up and make sure it's a really good editing experience, and get it out the door and in front of users. So in a nutshell, that's everything that's happening. That's the big picture. What are the big changes that are happening and why should I care? But that doesn't really help you use the new editor. It doesn't really give you anything to take to your users as a site administrator. So let's see what it looks like up close. So real quick, disclaimer, Gutenberg is an evolving tool. It's certainly a lot more stable than it was a year ago or a year and a half ago. But there may be some things that you see today that are not exactly what you see when it's finally implemented in WordPress 5.0. I think this is still going to be very useful for you because conceptually the big decisions have been made about the user interface, and any changes that happen to it should be relatively small. But don't rely too much on the screenshots that you see today. So this is what the new editor looks like. It might remind you a little bit of that Medium screenshot that I shared earlier. It's a very clean, white space-driven layout. You have this toolbar across the top with a plus button, and that's where your publish button and your preview button have moved to. And what you don't see is you don't see a lot of other stuff going on. You don't see that familiar gray background from WordPress that we've been using all this time. Instead, it's just a very open, sort of an open canvas to write in. So in terms of the technical implementation of Gutenberg, one thing you're going to need to know as a site administrator is that Gutenberg interacts with the WP posts table in the database, so where all of your content is actually saved via the WordPress REST API. And that means that the web hosting that you're using has to be set up to allow put requests in order to have Gutenberg communicate back and forth with the database. If you are using hosting provided by OIT, you are all set. We have taken care of that for you. If you are maintaining your own hosting, or if you are hosting on some sort of a third-party vendor or something like that, that's something you're going to need to have a conversation about with your hosting team. So the first time your user powers up Gutenberg, they should see these tips that help them on board. This is a relatively new feature. It was introduced very recently in the Gutenberg project, and I'm really excited about it. It's going to be giving you contextual tips, helping a new user get started and figure out what is this new thing. And actually, we're looking at adding some tips of our own via a plugin, and highlighting some of the work that we're doing that we'll talk about at the end of this presentation. What these tips will show your users, and what I'm going to show you in just a moment, is how to add content using the new editor. And the thing you need to remember is that in Gutenberg, everything is a block. So I used the block word earlier. That was something that Matt Mullenweg highlighted as, this sort of new concept. Take all these other ways of adding content and standardize them into blocks. And that's exactly what Gutenberg does. So where once you just had text and then you added other stuff into it, now text and the other stuff and anything you might add into your page or your post is done via block. If you're just typing, you don't have to think too much about blocks. You're just typing text and hitting your enter key, and that starts a new paragraph, and so on. But each time you hit that enter key, each time you start a new paragraph, that is going to create a new block in the Gutenberg interface. Anything that you put into the editor is going to be converted into blocks and managed as these things called blocks. And in particular, paragraphs are separate blocks from other paragraphs. If you put in a heading, it's its own standalone block. And so here in the screenshot, we have an unordered list, so a bullet point list. You can see a gray box around it. That gray box appears while you're editing that list, or if you're hovering your mouse over it. And that shows you the boundary of what's in the block versus what's in the rest of the page. And each block has a toolbar that's associated with it. Or in some cases, it won't have a toolbar like this, but it'll have other options that are available via a different interface. So the options that are available for a bullet point list like this might be slightly different than the options that are available for a paragraph or a heading or an image or something like that. And so this, again, WordPress is learning from these other editing and publishing tools out there. This is more reminiscent of a platform like Wix, where you have these sort of contextual menus that are popping up only when it makes sense for them to pop up. So I said before, everything is a block now, and there are many types of blocks. This isn't even all of them. But I guess, again, it's just useful to start thinking in terms of blocks. A paragraph is a block, so is an image, so is an image gallery. If you have a video or a YouTube embed, that's a block. If you add a button, that's a block, and so on and so forth. I'm going to use the word block somewhere around 40,000 times in this presentation. So how do you add a block? You can add a block using this plus button. This plus button always appears in the top left-hand corner of your editor, but it will sometimes appear in other places, depending on what you're doing in the editor. No matter where the plus button appears, it opens up the same block inserter tool. I want to highlight a couple of things with this block inserter tool. First is that it will always open up with your most used blocks. So just sort of out of the box default, it's very common things like paragraph, list, image, cover image, heading, quote, things like that. If you are regularly doing something in WordPress, WordPress will sort of learn that and will give you the blocks that you use most often. As you scroll down, after the most used section, there are other categories of blocks, like common blocks and formatting, things like that. And so you can see what other blocks are available to you. At the very top of the block inserter is a search bar. And this is actually important. This is something most of our users didn't notice when we did user testing, is if you are looking for a block that will do something and you're not sure what category it might be in, this is the search tool that you can start to type what you think the block might be named or a keyword or something like that. And the editor will do its best to match your search term up with the block that you're looking to use. That's a really handy tool, especially when you're just starting out. It's a little overwhelming, the number of blocks that are available to you. And so being able to filter it down by search terms is super helpful. So in some cases, blocks can be nested inside of other blocks when that's a block that supports nesting. So again, this is a relatively new feature. So one of the blocks that's available is a column block. So here we see two paragraph blocks. One of them has focus, so one of them is highlighted and has that blue line around it. So two paragraph blocks, an image block, and the image block has the caption underneath as part of the same block, and then a YouTube block, a YouTube embed block. And all four of those blocks are contained. You can't see it because the paragraph block is in focus, but they're all contained inside of a container column block. So this is, again, a relatively new feature, but I think it has a ton of potential, and I'm really excited. In some of the custom blocks that we've been building that we'll talk about a little later, we've already started supporting nesting, and I think this is something that has a lot of, it's going to be very popular with users who are looking to have multi-column layouts that are easier to work with than using some sort of shortcode to create those multi-column layouts or something like that. I will say it takes a little while to get the hang of how they work, and in terms of how they render on the front end, sometimes depending on how your theme is coded, it might be a little messy, but that's something that can be fixed relatively easily, and I think there's a lot to be excited about. So each block can be customized individually. I mentioned the toolbar that shows up at the top of many blocks, such as this paragraph block right here. But there's also this little menu over to the right-hand side that can open up with this little three-dot button, these three dots in a vertical line. When you click on that button, that will open up this little drop-down menu that gives you a few options, like duplicate the block or convert to a shared block. And so a shared block is if you are taking content that you've created and you want to reuse it multiple times elsewhere on the website. We won't talk about that too much in this presentation, but it's a pretty cool feature that you should check out. And then also there's this show block settings, which will open up a sidebar on the right-hand side, which you can see here. And so these block settings are, again, just like the little toolbar that appears at the top. These are settings that are specific to the block that is being interacted with. So not all blocks will have the same settings in the toolbar or options for formatting in the toolbar, and not all blocks will have the same options in the right-hand sidebar. Just about every block has at least one setting in the sidebar. It is possible to have a block that doesn't have any of these extra settings in the sidebar, in which case, if you open up this sidebar, you just get the name of the block and the description of the block, but nothing else. But it's a really handy tool for additional customization, additional formatting of a block, and we're going to see what some of that looks like in a little bit. So you might be wondering how your users will react to this big change in the WordPress editor. And it is a big change. Over 12 years, we've gotten used to one particular way of doing WordPress, and now I'm asking you to learn a whole new thing, and learn a whole new thing that you use as an editor probably on a daily basis. So as a site administrator, there's a good chance that you support additional users, not just yourself. So you're probably going to get a lot of questions about what is this new thing and how do I use it? So with that in mind, we conducted some user testing in late January 2018. Gutenberg looked a little bit different than it looks now in January 2018, but I think a lot of the lessons that we learned are still very applicable. We ran mainly power users who are already familiar with WordPress through a 30-minute content exercise to get to know the new editor and create content. The reason we used power users rather than people who were totally new was because we wanted to, I guess, cover what we thought was going to be the most common use case on campus, was people who are already maintaining a departmental website and we're going to have to learn how to use the new editor. I do think there are going to be some things that are challenging with Gutenberg for people who are new to WordPress completely, especially people who are not very familiar with these kinds of web interfaces, not familiar with iconography rather than text to guide their user experience or things like that. So we shared some thoughts about this and a rundown on how all of our user testing worked in a blog post at that URL. Go to ncc.edu/Gutenberg testing results. I probably wrote a much longer blog post than I needed to. I tried to dive into a lot of detail. Feel free to check it out or maybe just skim it, but I think there's a lot of good information in there. So the first thing that we learned with our user testing is that nobody knows what to call anything or where anything is. That's sort of to be expected with a new editing interface. Everything's been moved around. Everything maybe looks a little different. And there are certain things that don't have obvious names, and that can be a challenge in supporting users. So my favorite quote here, one of our testers was looking for, or trying to describe what he did, clicking the little 3-dot button that opens up the menu for more block settings. And he was looking for he wanted to describe it, and he said, so I clicked on the little mini hamburger options thing. I don't know that I would call that a mini hamburger options thing, but that's what he chose to call it. If you're supporting your users, maybe be prepared for some adventures in WordPress vocabulary. And frankly, I don't know exactly what to call that 3-dot button either. So it's something we're all going to have to get used to and learn a little bit together. It's also not always clear when to choose which block. And so, for example, one of the exercises we ran our users through, we gave them something that looks like this gray box here with the big T and the text next to it, or as you know, the big T with the regular size text. And we asked them to recreate that box. And there are a few things that look like maybe they're the right choice. There's the paragraph block that you're using for most of your content. There's the quote block and the pull quote block, and those do slightly different things, even though they're named very similarly and have the same icon. And then there's the verse block, which is actually built to help support poetry bloggers and people who need to have very deliberate line breaks. So, spoiler alert, the correct answer is if you want to create this gray box, you can do the whole thing just using the paragraph block. The same block that you're using for the bulk of your text, the bulk of your content, using all those options in the right-hand sidebar, you can use to format to give it this kind of a style. And so just to highlight that again, this is this question that we keep coming back to, or we kept coming back to in our user testing: when do you need a new type of block? So here we have, again, a regular paragraph block that's unstyled, and then underneath it, a paragraph block that has that gray background, that has that big first capital letter. Here I've even changed the text color as well. And this can all be done just by customizing the same block. And we really can't say this enough times. Sometimes you're really just going to have to try a different block. Sometimes you're going to have to try the same block. It's a little bit of an adventure trying to learn. So again, another quote, we were asking somebody to embed a YouTube video. And his first thought was to go for the image block, which I think makes a lot of sense in sort of WordPress world. We go to the media library when we want to insert different types of media, and it's all under one button. Now the image block is to add images. It won't work if you want to add a video, but it's not a bad place to start. After trying the image block, he moved on to the video block, and the video block again doesn't work for a YouTube video because it's looking to embed a video file that's stored locally. And then finally, the correct answer is to use the YouTube block, which allows you to embed a YouTube video. This is something that's a little confusing, and actually one of the things we're looking at is disabling the video block on the sites that our team manages, just because we tend to discourage our users from hosting videos in WordPress. Our hosting in OIT is not really optimized for that. And so sometimes you're just going to need to remind your users, if this isn't looking exactly right, if you've tried everything in that right-hand sidebar, all of those options, try a different block and try looking for something that might do the same thing that you may have missed. It's a little bit of a learning experience, and it takes a little time to build that intuition. So I mentioned the block settings in the right-hand sidebar. In our user testing, none of our users noticed that sidebar without getting a hint from us. And that's sort of a significant thing. I think it makes a lot of sense, and Jen has talked about this as well in some of her trainings. In WordPress, we're used to having the right-hand sidebar in the editing view be sort of page level choices. What's the page template we're using in a post? What's the taxonomy that applies to the entire post? If it's a page, what's its parent? Things like that. We're not used to looking to the right-hand side when it comes to visual changes or these sorts of formatting choices. So this is a change that is new in WordPress, is this extra stuff that's over in the right-hand side that you're going to have to learn to look at. I think a lot of your users that you support are going to forget about it, and you might forget about it too for a little while. And so this is just one of those things you're just going to want to keep reminding your users, take another look, remember that it's over there. One of the other things that some of our users struggled with was this question of whether the settings that happen over in the right-hand sidebar, whether they adjust the entire block or whether they only adjust the selected text within a block. So for instance, if you're using a paragraph block and you want to change the text size in the paragraph, do you need to select the text before you use the control to change the font size, or can you just use the font size control without selecting the text? And so this is something that's also a little confusing for a user coming into this after using the classic editor. We think about making text bold using that toolbar across the top. You highlight the text and then you push B, and that makes that text bold. And that's still how the things work for the toolbar that appears across the top of a block. but for the settings over in the right-hand sidebar, those settings will generally apply to the entire block rather than just what's being selected. Again, this is one of those things that you sort of need to learn and develop some intuition about. So when we tested our users, we found that it took about 20 minutes for our users to really kind of figure things out and go from like, oh my goodness, what's happening? I'm, deer in the headlights, scared, to, yeah, this is actually kind of cool, and I'm looking forward to using this. The main challenge with that 20-minute trial and error, get used to it, is how many questions and how many support tickets are going to be generated. This little question of n users times 20 minutes of trial and error. If you only have a handful of users, just you and one or two other people, it's probably worth your time to just sit down and everybody get together and try it out for a few minutes together. If you are supporting a larger organization of content creators on your website, it may take a little more strategy, a little more planning. And if you need any help from us in Central IT, we are definitely available to do custom training and things like that. So the key support strategies that we're going to recommend to you, and hopefully you're already thinking about yourself, is number one, to tell your users that this is coming before it happens. You don't want to surprise your users. Number two, give your users maybe a 30-minute guided tour in some form, whether that's you sitting down with them or whether that's asking them to register for our Gutenberg for Content Creators workshop. And then we also have this website available here, oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg, as a space where you can practice and create things in Gutenberg before you publish it. Excuse me. Before you publish it on your live website. Excuse me. Sorry about that. And so I've mentioned this a few different times, a few different ways, but there are these helpful hints that you're going to be giving your users over and over and over again. Hint number one, don't forget to look over at the advanced settings in the right-hand sidebar. And hint number two, try a different block. Maybe what you're doing right now isn't working. There might be another block that does what you're looking to do. So with that in mind, I'd like to give everybody 5 to 10 minutes to play with Gutenberg themselves. So we've set up a couple of different ways that you can experience Gutenberg. The second one I'm going to tell you about, and it might be worth remembering this URL, but I don't want you to use right now. This would create your own test website. It's only available to NC State users, but you can go in and create a test website and build and save and create content to your heart's content. We really encourage people to go in and do as much as you can to get to know the new editor. But for just right now, just to get a quick look, I want you to use the first option, the public sandbox option. So if you open in your browser and go to oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg/quick, there's no login required. It will take you straight to an editor view rather than having to go through the WordPress dashboard, and any changes that you make are not going to be saved. So it's an opportunity for you to really just mash away at your keys and get to know the new editor and get a quick look at what this looks like. So I'm going to mute myself for 5 minutes, and then hopefully you'll have a chance to look at how the new editor works, get it under your fingers a little bit, maybe think of some questions you want to share in the Q&A document. And when I come back, I'm going to highlight a few things that I really enjoy doing in the new editor, really enjoy about the new editor, and we'll go from there and talk about what upgrading looks like.
Hey, Sally, I'm jumping in here to answer your question. Unfortunately, the quick editor is really just a place for you to play and try things out. But yes, the preview is never actually going to generate the final page. So that's kind of the bummer of the quick editor. All you'll be able to preview is in the actual backend editor. Sorry about that.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So yes, so this quick editor that we're giving you, this public sandbox, it won't generate a preview for you. But if you do want to go to the other link that we shared, oitdesign.nccu.edu/Gutenberg, and create a site there, the preview button should work there. So it's been about 5 minutes. I hope you've all had a chance to play with the quick editor. I want to highlight a couple of things myself. Let me just make sure yes, that's working. So as I wait for it to load, so a few things I'd like to point out. First is that unlike in the screenshots that we've been sharing, in this quick editor, you will see that the editor is using campus fonts, campus stylings, the red links with the underline, things like that. This is something that we've done on our test site, this quick editor here, and it's also something that we're starting to build into the themes that our group maintains. If you maintain your own theme, or if you have a web developer that you've contracted with or something like that, it's worth talking to them about adding the editor styling to make it match and give you that real what you see is what you get experience, having your styling in the editor match what you see on the front end of the site. That's just sort of a little side note that's not really central to the editing experience, but I think is worth thinking about as you move forward with your Gutenberg adventure. So I want to highlight, as I move my mouse over each block, you'll see that the block gets outlined in blue, and then also tells you what kind of a block it is when it's being highlighted when you're hovering. So this is a paragraph block. As I scroll down the page, we see this is an image block, and so on. Each of these block types is slightly different, has slightly different options available to it. So here I'll go ahead and click on the image block, and we see the toolbar that's available here gives you alignment options. Gutenberg introduces these two new alignment options, wide width and full width, which allow it to break out of the main content column. So for instance, if it's just a center aligned image, it's the same width as the paragraph above it. If I make it a wide width image, that breaks it out to be a wider width. And if I go to full width, it will go all the way to the edge of the page. This is something that requires, again, a little bit of work in your theme, in your WordPress theme, but actually it's very easy to set up, and it gives you some neat visual effects that were a little bit harder to do in the classic editor. So I'll scroll down a little bit here. Here we have a couple of different headings. So this is an H2 heading, and then just beneath here is an H3 heading. If you have not heard me or somebody else from our group talk about the importance of headings and accessibility, I'll just give you a very brief rundown. It's not just about changing what the font size is or the style of the font. Headings do a lot to provide structure to a page, and that structure is important for users with disabilities who are using assistive technology like screen reading software. In Gutenberg, not only do you have the option of choosing your heading level, H2, H3, H4, and so on, but if you go up to, at the very top, this little content structure button, it's a little information icon, and and you click on that, that will open up a little dialog that shows some information about your page or your post. For instance, the word count and the number of headings and the number of paragraphs, the number of blocks, but also a document outline. So it will start with the title and then give you your H2 and H3 tags. And if I do something that's bad for accessibility, like make this an H6 tag, which is going to jumping from an H2 to an H6 is skipping lots of levels and gives you a confusing structure to the page for an assistive technology user, then if I go up to this little button and take a look at my document outline, Gutenberg will detect that the heading structure doesn't match what it's expecting to see, and it will tell you this is the incorrect heading level. It won't stop you from publishing, so if you are dead set on having incorrect heading levels, it will allow you to do that, but it's hopefully going to give you an option to check and make sure, am I making my page or my post, am I structuring it in a way that is usable for everybody, not just people who are sighted users or users who are more like yourself or the people that you work with. You want to make sure you're inclusive of everybody. So I will go ahead and change that back to the H3 that it was. Similarly, if I highlight this paragraph text, so you have your options here for the toolbar, and see, I did exactly that thing I was talking about before. I was highlighting the text to do something I don't have to highlight the text for, because the options in the right-hand sidebar apply to the whole block. So if I go to this paragraph of text and I bring it into focus by clicking on it, and I go over to my right-hand sidebar, in addition to these options right here for changing the text size, I can bump it up to a large text size or a medium text size, or choose a custom size like so. In addition to all of that, I can change the background color and the text color of the text of this paragraph. So I can go ahead and add a very dark background color against my black text. And here, again, another accessibility improvement, you'll see this little notice that pops up that says, this color combination may be hard for people to read. Try using a darker background color and or brighter text color. This is important for accessibility and just really general usability, anybody being able to read this. Most of your users are probably not going to try to put black text against a dark gray background. Probably most of your users will see that that's not going to be very helpful for anybody. But some of your users might try to put, for instance, black text against an orange or a yellow or a red, and this notice that pops up will, it won't be able to protect against bad taste, but will be able to detect when something doesn't meet the accessibility requirements that we're required to meet as a university. I will go ahead and clear that out again because I don't like the way that looks. Some blocks that I'd like to highlight. So first I'm going to, I've selected and I put my cursor in a paragraph block, and I'm going to hit my Enter key to create a new space right here. If I push the add block button right here, this will insert a block into that space that I've just created. And so, for instance, if I choose a cover image block, this is a new block that's available. I'll go ahead and choose an image. Let's say the Reynolds Coliseum scoreboard. So this cover image block, in addition to just displaying the image, it gives you the option of putting text over top it. Here's some text. And this is a pretty cool new feature. This gives you a lot of options for highlighting something that's important, something that you want to be a little more visually engaging. Like the image block, it has these options to break out of the out of the normal content width and be the full width of the page. And then here we have this background dimness option. You may, in many cases, want to dim the background enough so that the text is more legible. In general, so text against an image background still has to follow accessibility guidelines. Something like this with zero background dimness is not going to be legible to most users, or even if it's not legible to any users, it's something you want to be thinking about. This is not something that has that accessibility message that pops up, but it's something that you're going to want to be aware of making sure that you choose a dimness level that is readable for your users. Excuse me. There are a lot of blocks that are available, and as you start to get the hang of the Gutenberg editor, in addition to this block button right here that gives you your options or your categories for inserting blocks, or your search tool up here that will filter blocks by your search term. In addition to that, there's also a way of inserting blocks using slash commands. If your team at NC State is using Slack, for instance, or certain other tools, this is going to feel very natural. If you're not, that's okay. This is an option that's available whether you use it or not. In a new line right here, if I just start to type anything, this will automatically become a paragraph block. But if I clear that out and I start typing with a slash, this is going to open up a quick dialog for selecting a block. And so if I go slash and then start to type the name of a block, like cover image, it will filter that down with the same sort of searching functionality that the search bar in the block inserter pop-up has. And that can give me a quick way of accessing my cover image block. And once I have narrowed it down to the one that I want, if I hit enter, that will automatically insert it right there. Since I've been sort of living in the Gutenberg world for a while now, I use that all the time. Your new users probably are not going to ever even notice that that exists until you point it out to them. But it's a handy feature that can make it very quick to add blocks and build out a page. So this Gutenberg/quick page is something that is going to continue to be available certainly for the foreseeable future. You can always come back to it if you're looking to demo Gutenberg to somebody in a meeting or something like that. Please feel free to use it, and please feel free to create your own test sites at oitdesign.ncsu.edu/Gutenberg. That's available to anybody on campus with a Unity ID and password. Feel free to build as many or as few sites as you're looking to test with. So I'm going to go ahead and close the editor and move us along to talk about what upgrading looks like and some of the exciting things that you can expect as we move forward. I'll go ahead and leave. So, what happens when I upgrade? That is the question that everybody wants to know the answer to. And the good news is most of WordPress isn't changing. The vast majority of what WordPress does isn't going to look any different to you. So like adding media in the media library, or managing comments, or choosing your themes and plugins, turning them on and off, managing your users, anything under the tools and settings menus, none of that is going to change. There's no reason to panic about anything. It is worth mentioning certain plugins individually may have conflicts. So even though the way that you manage plugins isn't going to change, the way that plugins interact with WordPress once they're added may cause some trouble for you. This is especially true for plugins that were maybe written a couple of years ago and were abandoned by the developers, just haven't seen anything new happen to them. So with that in mind, the WordPress core team announced a couple of months ago the Gutenberg plugin compatibility let me try that again. The Gutenberg plugin compatibility database. That was surprisingly hard to say out loud. So this is a database where they're going to work through the entire WordPress plugin directory and catalog, does it work with Gutenberg? If it doesn't, where are the friction points? What's not working? And then direct feedback to the developers who are responsible for those plugins. Like anything in WordPress, it's an open source project. It's always looking for volunteers who want to give back feedback. So if you have a few extra minutes and you've got plugins that you want to test with, and you want to set up a testing environment in our Gutenberg oitdesign.nccu.edu/Gutenberg, we could potentially help out with that. If you want to contribute information back to the WordPress core team in this database, just let us know if you have any questions or if you want to set up your own site, or really if you're looking for ways of helping out with the Gutenberg development, if you're really excited about this, I have a long list of ways to suggest that you can help make this a really great product. So that's my pitch for contributing to WordPress. But moving on, so most of WordPress isn't changing. The media library, comments, adding themes and plugins, things like that. But what is changing is the post and page editing experience. So those two items in the menu, and then also any custom post types that you may have on your website. So like people directory, or like if you have a projects post type or something like that. And then also you may have some issues for themes and plugins that change what the content editing experience looks like. And that's something, it's this innocuous looking bullet point there, themes and plugins that change the content editing experience. That's actually a big deal. And that's maybe the most important thing to be thinking about when you're thinking about upgrading your website to Gutenberg. Because earlier I mentioned all these different ways that we've been trying to squeeze more life out of the classic editor, make it do more and more things. And if you have a website that relies heavily on some of these things that we've talked about, shortcodes or shortcake-powered shortcodes, advanced custom fields, or page building plugins, and all of these are used in some form on campus, this is something you're going to have to think about. So the big question, how much work will upgrading to Gutenberg be, has the big answer. It depends on how your theme and plugins are changing the content editing experience, whether you have these things like shortcodes or advanced custom fields or a page builder. So we've mapped out 4 sort of base scenarios that we encounter a lot at NC State. The first one is vanilla WordPress. It doesn't have anything that's dramatically changing the content creating experience. Not a lot of bells and whistles. Sites with shortcake-powered shortcodes, or just shortcodes in general. That's going to be a lot of sites that were built by our group over the last couple of years. Sites that, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. Sorry about that. I mentioned earlier that I'm getting over a cold and my throat decided to close up on me. So let's try that again. So we have vanilla WordPress websites. We have sites using shortcake-powered shortcodes. We have websites that are built using advanced custom fields. And that's in particular websites where ACF isn't used just for maintaining metadata, but it's being used as sort of a templating engine. Excuse me, where the content that you put into your advanced custom field modules ends up being populating some portion of a template or something like that. Excuse me. Jen, I think I'm going to have to ask you to take over for a moment while I go get some water.
Sure, of course. So let me see if I can jump in here and take over this document. as Brian was saying, there's 4 kinds: vanilla WordPress, sites with Shortcake, which again is a lot of our stuff, the sites with advanced custom fields. So there are plenty of folks on campus who are using those advanced custom fields because they have um, content built in a theme that uses those. Those are some of our clients as well, depending on how a site might have been built. Custom fields can be either part of your theme or can be an extra tool as well. So it shows up in many places. And then sites with page building plugins. Again, these are sort of an unknown. Depending on the tool that you're using, your experience may vary. So vanilla WordPress quickly here is just the basic, what it looks like as you go from classic to Gutenberg. And the default is to show up with this quote unquote classic editor, classic block, and it's going to have the content of your page in it all in one place. So all of your content will exist in one block. And then what's going to happen is you're going to transition to Gutenberg, and it's going to take all of that classic content in the classic content block. When you say open in, when you click on the menu on the right-hand side, you'll see an option that says convert to blocks. And then WordPress and Gutenberg are going to take all the content that's in that current large classic block and break it into the individual blocks that make sense for what that content is. So WordPress and Gutenberg are really smart. They're saying this is a regular paragraph of text that goes in a paragraph block. This looks like it's block quote content. Let's go ahead and put this in a quote block. And you can see that it automatically converts that for you. Now, there are going to be times when there are blocks that or content that WordPress and Gutenberg don't recognize. And if that's the case, they will handle that in one of a couple different ways. One is that it will default to a custom HTML block where, as with now, you may or may not have done this in the past, but you can actually edit your content in a second tab in the upper right-hand corner that will give you sort of the classic HTML view. And WordPress and Gutenberg, and in fact, most of the different blocks will have some sort of variation of that HTML view for them. And there's also specifically a custom HTML block that's all about that view so that you can add things that would be more customized and don't fit into the natural structure of content. As you're transitioning, you'll find that it should be fairly smooth and easy to move forward. Some pages might do some stuff that you don't expect. So again, if there's some kind of content that it doesn't recognize, it might put it in some kind of customized block, and you should either be able to continue to edit it in that custom block, or if you need help, you can contact us at oitdesign@ncsu.edu, and we can try and work with you to tweak some of those custom blocks to get some content the way you need it to be. Some plugins may break as part of this process. In particular, mostly, I would say, by the time this rolls out, it's really just going to be ones that are old that honestly probably you shouldn't be using anyway, because it's a good idea to go ahead and update out of anything that's more than, say 2 years old. So that's something to keep an eye on, but hopefully it won't be a major issue. Vanilla WordPress users, those who have a basic site, really shouldn't have too much of a problem. It should be pretty simple.
All right, thanks, Jen, for covering for me.
Sure thing.
So I'm better now, everybody. You don't have to call 911.
Yay!
So that's the vanilla WordPress scenario, where you have a generally pretty straightforward, simple website. But again, we've had all these different ways of, getting more and more life out of the classic editor. And so a lot of people on campus aren't going to be in the vanilla WordPress situation. So we've mentioned Shortcake-powered shortcodes, and this generally applies to sites with any kind of shortcodes, but it's especially true for folks who have been using the NC State shortcodes plugin that we developed. So Shortcake allows you to have these, what you might be familiar with as these brackets, and then sort of pseudo HTML. Shortcake will generate a preview in your editor so you can sort of see what it's going to look like, and it'll give you a nice user interface for creating it. So the good news is, much like the content in the classic block in vanilla WordPress, everything just gets dumped into a classic block. It looks a little funky. A little bit of CSS can clean that up, but everything basically works and renders the way it should. But you still have the same issue of all of your content is in this classic block. You can continue to edit it in there if you want to, but if you really want to take advantage of everything Gutenberg offers, you're going to need to go to that Convert to Blocks option in the drop-down menu and break it up into, into separate blocks. And when you do that, when you have shortcodes, what you end up with is the shortcode block. So your pretty previews that you used to have using Shortcake start to disappear and be replaced with the shortcode blocks that give you the raw square bracket, pseudo HTML, closed square bracket appearance. So this may be something that gets adjusted over time. There may be ways of having shortcodes preview in some sort of way in Gutenberg. Right now, we can sort of plan on it looking like this. It's certainly in the short term. The good news is that nothing is broken. In terms of editing and publishing, if you leave it like this and you publish it to the front end of your website, the shortcodes continue to render. Your end users who visit your website won't see anything different. This will impact your editors, though. If your editors have been using that pretty Shortcake interface that we've been encouraging people to use for the last couple of years, when they switch to this, all of a sudden they're going to hit this wall of text like you see in the screenshot, and they are going to be maybe a little startled by it. So eventually, what you'll want to do is start converting those shortcodes into other kinds of blocks. And it's possible we may be able to help you out with that if you have any questions. And we're starting to build some custom blocks that we'll talk about a little bit later that should give you a nice smooth transition there. So again, to recap this sort of Shortcake shortcode situation, the editor previews aren't going to render yet. It's possible that the solution might be in the works in the next couple of months. If you are using the NC State Shortcodes plugin, be sure to update it to the latest version, and we might have a couple of new updates coming out in the next couple of months to try to smooth the transition from current WordPress to Gutenberg WordPress. And if you have any custom shortcodes, anything that is a plugin that you've added or something built into your theme, the slide here says they need to be fixed. Fixed is maybe not the right answer or the right word for it, because again, it still works for your end user, but you may want to look at having a block, or look for a block that is a good sort of replacement for what that shortcode does, or talking to a developer to create a block that's a good successor to the shortcode that you have there. The next scenario is for websites that use advanced custom fields. So Jen and I both sort of touched on this. When you're using advanced custom fields, not just for managing metadata, but also for managing actual content. A lot of developers, both on-campus and off-campus vendors, use ACF to create these modular page templates. And the reason why is because it's a really powerful tool. It's one of the most popular solutions to getting more out of the classic editor, classic WordPress. And there's a sort of an extreme implementation of it where the classic visual editor is completely hidden, and all that you see are these repeatable custom field groups that let you insert content into your page that way, as we see in this screenshot here. So again, there's sort of a good news, bad news situation. The good news is all of those field groups, everything that ACF does, should still basically work. The developers who built advanced custom fields are actively maintaining the project and are working to make sure that their ACF fields continue to function the way you're used to having them function. The bad news is that even though everything still works, if you are using a theme that has been designed to be totally reliant on advanced custom fields, if you're using a theme that doesn't use the classic editor at all, if everything is sort of hard-coded where you put into this ACF module and that populates this part of the page, and then another module populates another part of the page, then you're not really going to get anything out of the transition to Gutenberg. And you might end up with a user interface that looks kind of funny. So you might end up with a situation where you have what we see in the screenshot here, all of those field groups at the bottom, which will still work, still continue to function. You can keep adding modules. But above that, you might have this empty canvas where you want to add your where you want to add blocks, and you have a block inserter where you can add blocks. But because of the way the theme has been written, if it's been written to be totally reliant on these ACF modules, any blocks that you insert probably aren't going to show up on the front end, or they might not show up in the way that it looks like they should based on the WYSIWYG experience in the editor. And so that's going to probably cause some user confusion. It's probably something that you're going to want to move towards. I know some of the other developers on campus who use ACF, like our friends in University Communications, are looking at how they want to go about converting ACF to Gutenberg blocks. And one of my colleagues here in OIT, Miles, has a sort of proof of concept auto conversion script that it's not one size fits all. It has to be customized for each website. You have to have a really clear idea of what ACF module should go to what block. But it's possible that you can we might be able to help you convert lots of content from ACF powered pages to Gutenberg powered pages. So again, to recap the ACF scenario, the front end won't break, so your end users won't see any changes, but the editor might get a lot more confusing for your users. And if you are using a theme that uses ACF in a major way, now is a great time to start talking to your developers who maintain your site or maintain your theme, because some theme rewrites might be necessary. So the last scenario that we've sort of mapped out is the scenario where you have some sort of a page building plugin. And I say we've mapped it out. That might be overselling it a little bit. This is sort of a hold on to your butt situation. We don't know what's going to happen with page building plugins. Part of the reason is there are a lot of page building plugins out there, or themes, page building type things that you're building off of. You have Divi, you have Beaver Builder, you have Visual Composer. Those are some of the big three names, but there are a lot more out there too. And so our office, for the most part, doesn't use these tools. There are a couple of places where we've used them or where we've inherited websites that use them. In some cases, it might make sense to switch to Gutenberg, like native Gutenberg blocks, and stop using that page building thing. In other cases, it's a well-maintained product that's being written and rewritten to work with Gutenberg. So the best thing I can suggest to you is that first you find out what the plan is for your page building theme or plugin. If they have a plan to be compatible with Gutenberg, then you're going to want to make sure that you have an up-to-date license from them. You want to update to the latest version of their plugin or theme, and you want to make sure you're paying attention to what they're announcing on their websites or in their Twitter feed or whatever about what comes next. And if they don't have a plan, then it's time to start looking for other options. And if you're not exactly sure what to do then, that's a great time to come talk to us. We can help talk you through your options there. So I'm going to give everybody a little bit of homework to go home and First, find out what your site might be using, whether you're using Shortcake-powered shortcodes or ACF or a page building plugin. Contact whoever you need to contact to talk about your transition. And if you need some help or advice, our team, the OIT design team, is available for office hours every Friday morning from 9 a.m. to noon, usually in the Avent Ferry building. And there's information about those office hours online on our website. So you might be thinking that this is a big task. You're maybe thinking about all of the hundreds or thousands of pages in your website that are going to need to be touched and things like that. You have some options for upgrading. Option number 1 is going to be to upgrade when WordPress 5.0 is released. Option number 2 is going to be to upgrade early. And option number 3 is to upgrade late. So option number 1 is the easy choice, which is don't worry about it too much until WordPress 5.0 is released. And then when WordPress 5.0 is released, just push that button, please update now, update your website, and now you've got Gutenberg, and now you are using the new editor. Like I said, this is the easy choice. This is not requiring much of you right up front. I will warn you, if you maintain a lot of websites, or even just a couple of websites, but they have a lot of users, you might get a lot of user questions flooding in all at once. So maybe think about the timing. Think about whether you want to do a couple of websites staggered on different days, things like that. Option number 2 is to get Gutenberg early. This is something that you might want to do, especially if you have a simple website, that vanilla WordPress scenario. So you can upgrade your website to Gutenberg today via a plugin. You can search in the plugin directory for Gutenberg and install it and activate it, and then turn it on whenever you're ready. When you turn on that plugin, the classic editor is still available as an option, but it's not the default option when you click to edit a page. The good news about upgrading early is you get to choose when you want to upgrade it. You get to control your destiny. And this is very useful if you have other job responsibilities, or if you have multiple websites you're maintaining, or something like that. Being able to choose the date when this happens, rather than waiting to see, is it in October, is it in November? That's a really bad time for me. This is the best option for making the choice yourself and controlling what happens. The disadvantage is that you're installing it before it's officially released, and so you might run into a few weird issues, occasionally bugs. Most of the bugs have been worked out, but there's still a few. You might run into some weird behavior where the editor doesn't do exactly what you expect it to do. So again, this is probably good for a simple WordPress website that doesn't have all these bells and whistles. Excuse me. It's especially good for a non-critical website. If you want to start with a simpler website and then excuse me, and then move on to some of your bigger, more complicated websites. And then this is a good idea if you have a website that has a user base that's going to give you really good and useful feedback that you can then use when you want to upgrade another website. So then option number 3 is to delay upgrading to Gutenberg. So the WordPress community and the WordPress core team is aware that this is sort of a big change, and they have created a plugin called the Classic Editor plugin. And so after WordPress 5.0 is released, if you install the Classic Editor plugin, it will be like Gutenberg never happened. It will maintain the existing Classic Editor, and then you also have options that will allow you to turn on Gutenberg a little at a time. And there's actually another plugin that we're not mentioning in the slides that's called, I think it's called Gutenberg Ramp, that gives you even more granular control over when and how Gutenberg is turned on for your website. So the big upside to option 3, delaying upgrading to Gutenberg, is that nothing changes. Your website just keeps chugging along the way it's been doing all along. The downside is that you're going to risk falling behind. So more and more things in the WordPress world are going to be built for Gutenberg with the expectation of Gutenberg, and the Classic Editor plugin may not be maintained forever. At WordCamp US, Matt Mullenweg, the development lead for WordPress, was asked how long is the Classic Editor plugin going to be supported, and he answered, for a while. And we don't really know what for a while means. It's probably for a long while, probably long enough to get most people using Gutenberg, but it's something you need to be thinking about. Gutenberg is the future, and the Classic Editor is really only there. The Classic Editor plugin is really only there to help you make that transition. So, who should delay upgrading? The answer is people who have a plan for upgrading in the future. The Classic Editor plugin buys you time and lets you do it on your terms. It is not the same as not upgrading ever, and it's definitely not the same as not upgrading to WordPress 5.0, especially if you're being hosted in OIT hosting. There are requirements to make sure your WordPress website is at a recent version of WordPress. We're going to continue doing that even after WordPress 5.0 comes out, so you won't be able to just hang on to WordPress 4.9.6 forever. Upgrading to WordPress 5.0 and then turning on the Classic Editor lets you stay current with WordPress and upgrade to Gutenberg when you're ready, but it's something you should be thinking about. What is your plan and what's the timetable you want to act on this? So again, the key takeaway here, you should be making a plan and talking to your web support team, regardless of who that web support team is, whether it's us or somebody else on campus or an outside vendor, and figure out what the next step is for your website. So we're coming up on 3:30. I'm going to keep talking a little bit past that. Those are the key things that up to this point in the presentation, the really important things that you want to be walking away with. But I do want to highlight some exciting stuff for what's going to be coming on campus, and then just in general what's possible with Gutenberg. So if you want to stick around, please do. First, there's this, so we have this new thing, Gutenberg, this new editor, and Johannes Gutenberg right there, and then we're bringing it to NC State, and so you might wonder, what does that look like? And I can tell you what that looks like. That looks like Mr. Johannes Wolfenberg right there. That little graphic was created by our colleague Miles, and it brings me joy every time I look at it. So Johannes Wolfenberg is the mascot of the NC State Blocks plugin. This is a plugin that we are working on developing in consultation with University Communications, with our IT accessibility coordinator, and with other web teams on campus, to build a set of blocks in addition to the core WordPress Gutenberg blocks, a set of blocks that are going to be useful for NC State websites, that do all the things that NC State websites need to be able to do on their pages and posts. We are in the middle of building out our initial beta release, which we're hoping to have available for more people to test at the end of the summer. We're building things like alerts and callouts, so those colorful banners, using the brand colors to highlight some important content, an enhanced text block, which gives you text plus inline icons right next to it. Major link, so those are those hyperlinks that have the little arrow that scoots over to the right when you hover over it. A panel, NC State branded recent posts, a table of contents, and then a video banner. You may have seen video banners showing up on the NC State homepage, for instance, things like that. So those 8 blocks are going to be part of our initial beta release, but we are always looking for ideas for new things that should be blocks. We won't in general, we won't duplicate something that already exists in the core set of Gutenberg blocks. But if there's something that is frequently on your website that either you've been using a shortcode for, or that you're using custom HTML for, now's a great time to let us know. We're already looking at things like calendar blocks, or the adapting a block for the NC State directory plugin, things like that. But we're always open for more ideas. And then in the future of blocks, there are some really exciting things that might happen. We might be able to do blocks that are aware of each other on the page. So coding in these conditional relational relationships, maybe even like sort of a suggestion will pop up. It looks like you've inserted this block. This other block is a common block that follows it. We're going to try not to go quite as far as a Clippy style, Microsoft Word suggestion, but those sorts of conditional suggestions like that. One of the things that I'm really excited about with Gutenberg that we haven't talked about in this presentation are what are called block templates, where you can create a post type or a page template that's pre-populated with blocks that might be useful for your user. We're looking at potentially creating a ServiceNow block that will integrate with the ServiceNow API someday. Protected content blocks, so content that's only available under Unity ID login. A PackPix image selector block, so campus images from the photo repository that University Communications maintains. Some sort of a chart or data visualization block is something that we've been talking about. All these different things that are potentially possible with Gutenberg blocks that we just, are on our list, and things that we'd like to explore. But again, if you have ideas for things, if you have a need for your website that you think other people on campus might benefit from as well, now's a great time to suggest it and get in on that early user testing too. So besides that, now's also a good time to talk to whoever developed your theme, whether that's on campus or an outside vendor, about some things they can do to improve your theme to really make it Guten ready, work really well with Gutenberg. So the first thing are theme styles. So Gutenberg has its own style sheet for front-end styles for the core blocks that it creates. And some of those styles might need to be tweaked a little bit so that it plays nice with your theme CSS, your own theme styles. So this is mostly just going to be little things like text sizes or colors or things like that. Just making sure that when somebody inserts a photo gallery block in Gutenberg, it comes out looking like a photo gallery in a nice grid on the front end of your website. You may also want to talk to your developer about editor styles. So I mentioned that earlier, making sure that your in-editor experience looks like what your published experience looks like. We've created a GitHub repository in the NC State GitHub service that gives you a starting point. This is not complete, and it's not necessarily going to match everything in your theme, but it should give you a starting point for giving you some nice Guten styles in the Gutenberg editor. And just to highlight what they'll look like, on the left-hand side is what default Gutenberg looks like, with rounded corners on the button and the traditional bullet points and the serifed text, the serifed font face. And then on the right-hand side is what happens when you have the Gutenberg styles that we've created for the editor. It looks a lot more like what you see on an NC State website in terms of the square border for the button, and the font face and the bullet point style that you see on an NC State website. Excuse me. You may also want to talk to your theme developer about that wide align support that I mentioned when I was demoing Gutenberg earlier. You see this sort of thing at NC State all the time, especially on the homepage. You see this big blue block in this screenshot that breaks out of the regular content width. That's going to be possible with Gutenberg using the align wide and align full uh, alignment options. It's a relatively simple piece of CSS that needs to be inserted into your theme, and it's it's something we can talk about with you if you have any questions about how you might do that with your theme developer. There are also so you may have noticed with the background color and the text color, there's a selection of colors that are available that are not NC State branded colors, like that pink and that beautiful Carolina blue. We can change that to be NC State colors with a relatively simple chunk of code that you can add to your theme that will make it look more like this, where we have our 13 brand colors um, and then the color of the rainbow sort of color selector if you have something that you need that's not one of those colors. That's something that I really encourage you to talk to your theme developer about, just to make sure that you're giving your users the right set of colors so they don't start adding lots of pinks and Carolina blues. And then there's a lot more than that that is worth exploring as well. It might be worth removing certain blocks that you don't want your users to see. If you don't want to confuse them with having the video block and the YouTube embed block, there sometimes is a little bit of extra work that goes into making Gutenberg work for a custom post type, and that's something we can help you out with too if you want to come to office hours and chat about it with us. And then I mentioned earlier building block templates. So that's, again, pre-populating certain posts or pages with blocks that you want your users to use. There are lots of options with block templates. I'm so incredibly excited about block templates. I think there's a lot of potential there. And, that's something that I'm excited about, and I hope you are too. If you're not excited about it, come to office hours, and one of us can show you just everything that you can do with block templates and why I'm so giddy about it. So all of that is to say, Gutenberg is a big deal, and there's a lot of really cool stuff that's coming, but it's going to take a little bit of work to get us from here to there. It's going to take some planning and some good communication between you and your users, and between you and your theme or plugin developers. If your developers, if your web team that supports you is on campus, it's a pretty good bet that they're already thinking about Gutenberg, and it's possible that they attended our Gutenberg Developer Day that we held in March. If it's somebody that's off campus, an off-campus vendor, now is a really good time to reach out to them and start talking to them and ask them if they have experience with Gutenberg, what they're doing to prepare their clients, and so on. And again, if you ever have questions, you can come talk to us in office hours. And I'm right here to answer questions in the Q&A document. So with all of that, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A document. I'm going to hang out here for a few more minutes and answer them as I see questions. You can view these slides at go to nccu.edu/Gutenberg-admin. And if you have any questions later on, you can email our team at oitdesign@ncsu.edu. And then also, this video is going to continue to be available on YouTube if you'd like to go back and watch any part of it again, or if you just want to listen to me cough a bunch. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but that's an option for you too. So with all of that, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit, but I'll sit here and watch for Q&A questions and answer them as they come in. Well, it's been a few minutes, and I've seen the numbers on our number of viewers go down a little bit, so I assume if anybody had any questions, they would have asked them by now. If you think of something a little bit later, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, our email address is oitdesign, all one word, at ncsu.edu. And I will be I will be sending an email out to everybody who attended today with links to the slide and and link to the video. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening and being patient with me when I had my minor health emergency. And look forward to talking more about Gutenberg with you in the future. Thank you.